Hi, my dear friends. This is Mohammed Rafi presenting in front of you in a simplified manner tax liability under GST with regard to residential dwelling property, namely residential property given for rent, used as residence. If so, the rent is taxable or not under the GST. Here we have an amendment with effect from 18th July 2022. If you being a owner of the residential property, that property given on rental basis to the tenant who uses as his business or for his commerce, in that case, hey Mr. Supplier, you liable to pay GST because it is no longer as a residential property, because the tenant using is for his business or profession. Hence, is a forward charge, supplier liable to pay GST. If the supplier is a registered person, liable to pay GST. If the supplier is an unregistered person, then no one liable to pay GST. It is not exempted, but it is a forward charge. The supplier liable to pay GST. Supplier liable to pay GST only when he liable to pay GST. When he is a taxable person, then only liable to pay GST. It's a forward charge. If the residential property given on rent to a tenant, where the tenant using it as their own residence for residential dwelling purpose, in that case, if the recipient is unregistered person, no one liable to pay GST because it is qualified from exemption even now also under the GST. Meaning thereby, if the supplier is a registered person, maybe a registered person, he owns the property which is residential property given for rent to a tenant for his residential purpose, then the tenant using it as his residence, then in that case, the tenant being recipient is a registered person, no one liable to pay GST. Suppose, on the other hand, residential property given for rental to a tenant, where the tenant using the property as his residence for residential purpose. That means the residential property given for rent, where the tenant occupied it for his own residence purpose. In that case, if the recipient being a tenant is a registered person, in that case, whether supplier may be registered, supplier may be unregistered, hey Mr. Recipient, you liable to pay GST because it's an amendment from 18th July 2022. If the recipient is an unregistered person, then no one liable to pay GST. If the recipient being a tenant here is a registered person, recipient only liable to pay GST irrespective of the supplier status. He may be registered, may be unregistered under the GST. So it is further simplifying by presenting like this. Nature of supply: renting of residential dwelling for use as residence. Supplier, registered person, maybe a registered person, immaterial. Recipient is a registered person. If so, it is a RCM with effect from 18th July 2022. Repeating, renting of residential dwelling for use as a residence. That case, if the recipient is a registered person, then it is attract the GST under RCM. On the other hand, if the supplier is a registered person, maybe a registered person, recipient of this particular nature of supply, renting of residential dwelling for use as a residence, if the recipient is an unregistered person and the unregistered person using it as his residence purpose, then no one liable to pay GST. It is qualified exemption even now under the GST. So, simple example I will present here, my dear friends. For example, Mr. Rafi owned independent double bedroom house which is residential nature given to you on rental basis. You are an unregistered person using that property for your residence. You are living in my property as a tenant along with your family. I am getting the rent from you monthly, for example, 2 lakh rupees. Since the recipient is an unregistered person, whether supplier may be registered or unregistered, no one liable to pay GST. is qualified for exemption under the GST. Is the exemption continued? On the other hand, if Mr. Rafi owned the property, double bedroom, independent house, Mr. Rafi owned and given to CFO of Infosys company for his residence only, but I have given my property on rental basis to use as residential dwelling, not to CFO of Infosys company, but to the Infosys company. In that case, Infosys company being a registered person, in the given case, though I given on rental basis residential property for residential dwelling only, not to unregistered person, but to a registered person, though in that property maybe CFO of Infosys company using for his residence purpose. In spite of that, since I have given the property on rental basis to the Infosys company, which is a registered person in GST law, if that is the case, the registered person under the GST has to pay GST, namely under RCM, meaning thereby reverse charge mechanism applicable. Rafi given his property, which is residential dwelling property for residential purpose only, to the CFO of Infosys company, where the rental deed agreement made by Rafi with Infosys company, Infosys company is going to pay the rent to me. In that case, I have let out my property to a registered person for residential dwelling only. It is taxable with effect from 18th July 2022. Is it clear, my dear friends? If that is the case, who liable to pay GST? The liable to pay GST in the given case with effect from 18th July 2 onwards, the recipient, namely in our given example, Infosys company liable to pay GST. Reverse charge mechanism. Now the point arises, sir, a case where residential property given on rental basis for residential dwelling purpose to a particular sole proprietor of a sole proprietor firm, where sole proprietor firm is registered person. Sole proprietor is registered person, but the sole proprietor is using that property for his own residence as residential dwelling. In that case, just because of the sole proprietor of his sole proprietor firm is a registered person, will attract the GST in the given case. This point has been clarified upon the direction of the GST Council. Government notified in the notification number 15/2022 central tax rate, which is nil, dated 30th December 2022, stating that no GST on residential property rented in personal capacity for use as a residence. In the 48th meeting of the GST Council, the GST Council clarified that no GST is payable where a residential dwelling is rented to a registered person if the same is rented it in their personal capacity and for use as their own residence. This means that where the registered person is a proprietor of a proprietorship firm and they have rented out a residential property in their personal or own capacity and not that of the proprietorship, and the proprietor is for use as their own residence, then no GST will be applicable. How to understand that? Further simplifying this in a simplified example is as follows, my dear friends. Very important, one can expect in the examination also of CES, CMS, CS, or is also highly useful for the practitioners to use in their practice as GST practitioners to give the best advisory services to client. In this regard, I brought to your notice. If you look here, Mr. Rafi, sole proprietor, as a sole proprietor of sole proprietorship named as Rafi and Associates. Rafi and Associates are registered under the GST. Rafi and Associates is a registered person in GST. As a result, Rafi and Associates owned by Mr. Rafi. Rafi is a sole proprietor. He is a proprietor of a sole proprietorship firm. Therefore, Mr. Rafi is a registered person. Because Rafi and Associates owned by me. By giving my PAN number, I got registered. I am a registered person. Now, I taken residential property on rental basis from you. You are the owner of the property. You are the owner of residential property. For example, your name is X Limited. You own the property. Which property? A residential property. You are also a registered person. Rental deed is in between X Limited, owner of the property, and Mr. Rafi, tenant. Mr. Rafi, a registered person, is a proprietor of a sole proprietorship. But rental deed is executed by Mr. Rafi, not that of Rafi and Associates. As Mr. Rafi, my own capacity, in my personal capacity, I executed a rental deed with my landlord, X Limited. X Limited now given their property for my residential use. So Rafi and Rafi family is residing in that property, using that property absolutely for their residential dwelling purpose, not for the business or commerce. In that case, Mr. Rafi is paying the rent in his personal or own capacity, and the property is for use as his own residence. In that case, just because of Mr. Rafi, who is a proprietor of a proprietorship firm, sole proprietorship firm, which is a registered person, Rafi liable to pay GST being a recipient in the given case under RCM. This clarification, of course, given by the GST Council itself, stating that no GST liable to pay. GST Council given the clarification. Just because of proprietor of a sole proprietary firm is a registered person, and such a sole proprietor using the property, namely residential property, for his own residential dwelling purpose. In that case, just because of the proprietary registered person, you should not levy the GST. GST Council very clearly said to the GST department, resulting that no GST on residential property rented in personal capacity for use as residence. As simple as that, my dear friends. Suppose if Mr. Rafi executed a contract with the landlord in the name of Rafi and Associates, and the Rafi and Associates is a tenant, Rafi and Associates where Mr. Proprietor Rafi is using the property for his residential dwelling purpose, but not in his own capacity, but in the capacity of the proprietor of a proprietorship firm. In that case, it is under the reverse charge, the recipient, Rafi and Associates, liable to pay GST on such rent paid to X Limited. Got the clarity, my dear friends?